and welcome to the International Gaming Standards Association webinar on cyber risk in collaboration with MaxSure. My name is Mark Pace, and I'm the Vice President of IGSA and Managing Director of GSA Europe. I wanted to start out by saying that unfortunately, one of our panelists was unable to join us today due to travel-related delays. I guess air travel in the days of COVID is still not quite what it used to be. However, we are still very lucky to have with us two panelists who will share a great deal of information related to de-risking your operation, regardless of whether your operation is that of an operator, a supplier, or even a regulator. But before I introduce them, I wanted to take a few moments to sort of set the stage and go over a few housekeeping items just for this webinar. So firstly, we will be recording this webinar and we will make the video available on the IGSA website. And secondly, if you have any questions, please enter your questions using the Q&A icon, which should be on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then those questions might be answered in real time, depending on the topic, or we might answer them at the end of the webinar. So with that out of the way, let me talk a little bit about why I'm excited to participate in this webinar. Cyber attacks obviously are nothing new, but as I'm sure you're aware, some pretty high profile attacks have made a bigger news splash recently than those in the past. And if you think about it, from the Trojan code that was embedded in Wynn's installation packages, which ended up granted the attackers access to the compromised systems, to the more recent ransomware attack on the Colonial pipeline stemming, as was discovered, from a single leaked password. The issue of cyber risk, has really been thrust into the spotlight. And cyber attacks are not just relegated to the technology or finance or the energy industries. Our gaming industry is also not immune, as evidenced by, I think it was 2014, when the Las Vegas Sands databases were hacked. These hackers, they can and they will exploit vulnerabilities anywhere they can. And quite frankly, as online gaming continues to expand in North America, so obviously does the cyber risk. Now, what is cyber risk? So the Institute of Risk Management defines a cyber risk as any risk of financial loss, disruption, or damage to the reputation of an organization from some sort of failure of its information technology systems. From its failure of its information technology systems. I find that interesting. And many of you, in fact, might be familiar with the information technology risk assessments, which are, undertaken by companies who are looking to define, to understand, and obviously to mitigate risks that might stem from IT-related security gaps. However, as the recent cyber attacks have once again reinforced, right, risk assessments cannot just simply focus on technology or on IT processes. They really must take into consideration the entire organization and must incorporate every process that might end up enabling an attack. Similarly, risk assessments cannot be done, annually. They can't be just like an annual undertaking and you do it once and then you forget about it. Unfortunately, even with the most thorough of risk assessments, that is often the case. The project is done, the findings are reviewed, they're approved, some plans are made to implement any recommendations that came out of the assessment, and then that lovely binder is just put up on a shelf as if life just stands still. Nothing's going to change until, well, it's time for the next assessment. Obviously, that is not the case. So what can we as operators, suppliers, and regulators, collectively the gaming industry, do to remain vigilant of evolving threats and vulnerabilities that might stem from just daily operations as life continues to change? And how can we reduce that risk? So that's really what we're going to explore in this De-Risking the Gaming Industry webinar. And to help us do that, again, as I said, we have two excellent panel members whom I will now introduce. And gentlemen, I would ask that you give us a brief, bio or background of yourselves when I introduce you. So in alphabetical order, first we have Mr. Brandon Cooper, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at MaxSure. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you, Mark. Really excited to be here. Wow, what a perfect time, a point in time, um, given the high profile attacks and the types of things that are happening in the cyber risk environment. Um, so I'm Brendan Cooper. As Mark said, I am the Chief Innovation Officer for MaxSure. MaxSure is the global leader in cyber risk quantification. And I'm coming out of industry as a former MaxSure customer. And I have been for the last decade with Panini SPA, one of the largest licensees in the world. And I have led digital transformation, taking an ink on paper business into the digital future with commerce, mobile games, and NFT technology and the whole blockchain infrastructure and decentralized infrastructure supporting NFTs and cryptocurrencies. And so in that capacity, we've been stewards of some of the largest licensors brands in the world, including the NBA, the NFL, FIFA. And in that capacity, we've had extraordinary responsibilities to protect those brands, the Panini brand, and of course all of the millions of consumers, because it very much is a mass market company, and to protect their interests at the from a cyber risk standpoint. So really excited about this panel today, and really glad to be here and be part of it. And thanks to all the members of the IGSA and the community that are here with us today.
Thank you, Brendan. Very, very interested to hear what you have to say. Again, as you were a customer of MaxSure and now you are with them, you've seen both sides of the equation. So that's really great. The other gentleman that we have with us is Mr. David Tyburski, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Wynn Resorts. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me and allowing me the opportunity to participate in this. I am David Tyburski. I am the CISO for Wynn Resorts. Been in this role longer than most people want to realize. I'm actually with the company going on 13 years. Been running cybersecurity for 12, officially the CISO for over 7, and the first CISO in Wynn Resorts history. With the average lifespan of people in my roles much shorter than that. We can debate on what that lifespan is. I still think I outdo it by 3 times what everybody says the average is at max. So it's been rather interesting, and the gaming industry in and of itself is interesting because we get to operate in so many different aspects of verticals, from hospitality to gaming to food and beverage to the whole bit. And so the challenges on cyber risk and the challenges to a strong security program really present themselves in a unique way in this industry. So it's rather fun, and I appreciate the opportunities to be able to discuss the topics today.
Great. So without further ado, let's get into it. I've got a couple of questions that I'll ask, and please feel free. Let's keep this informal. There's only 2 of you and 1 of me, so we can talk about this stuff. We all come at it from different perspectives. So the first question that I thought might be a good way to introduce cyber risk specifically for the gaming industry is to ask, and maybe David, I'll start with you. How has cyber risk for the gaming industry evolved over time? You said you've been at this for 12 years, so you've seen quite, I would imagine, a change in cyber risk over those 12 years.
A huge change, actually. So if you go way back, I think a lot of industry started gaming specifically more on the hospitality side from a compliance standpoint. So we looked at regulations. We had PCI come up at us, right, as a new requirement many moons ago. And everybody said, oh my God, what are we going to do to meet this compliance regulation? And so like a lot of industries, I think we started down that path and saying, how do we get that checkbox? How do we handle that? I think you called it a binder that you put on a shelf once a year. And so I think we got to that point, and we also began to realize that, well, that just doesn't fit in real time. We can't just do it at a point in time solution and then go revisit it on an annual basis. We need to have it, look at it and every day in every aspect and what we do. And so that we've grown over the years to be able to understand that. And I think the industry has developed into that too. So if you go back back to that time, how do you protect a company? Well, you need some firewalls, and you need, these antivirus and maybe some intrusion prevention system, and you'll be good to go, right? And today you have identity and access. You're dealing with IoT devices, your reduction of your perimeter. I mean, there's 1,000 different things that have exposed it. Cloud services, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, my gaming data is no longer even within my possession. It's in a third party, and I still have to protect it for my organization. And then I love when the regulators say things like, and it can't leave the state boundaries, right? And you're like, well, okay, so how am I going to build cloud services to meet business requirement and meet your requirement to stay within the state? And so there's all these different challenges that come up. But I mean, that's the evolution, and that's the evolution of the business. It's the evolution of the environment. It's the evolution of the regulators, and your security and risk programs within the organization have had to evolve to meet those. I like to say the difference between IT and security is IT will tell you that they can do something, and security will tell you that they should do something. And that's a big difference in those statements. But the other side of that is, security needs to enable the business. Security needs to be there as a protection mechanism to drive everything forward. We have to evolve to meet those business requirements. And it's the truth of the fact is we don't generate revenue, or at least my department doesn't. I'm good at spending money, but there's a bunch of other departments that make money in this company, right? And so we have to protect them, and we have to protect that environment and encourage that. I want them to make as much as they can. I want them to do as much as they can safely. And so that's where we have to evolve to meet that. And so just looking at that as how does it evolve? Those are the things, is you have to be involved in what the business is about to do so that you can make good strategic plans and keep it safe, but still let the business move forward. If we take that approach of, well, the nickname is the CISNO, right? People in my position, that all they do is say is no, and they're saying this is the way it has to work. What they're doing is disabling the business and disabling progress. So, you want to see the companies that are gonna fail and fall is definitely in those positions, or that's going to turn into exactly what you introduced. It's going to be that guy who's saying, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't, and putting up the walls inside. You're going to get shadow IT. You're going to get people moving outbound to do things in different ways without you. And then all of a sudden, you're going to be the compromised company on the news, right?
So if I might, David,
together. Go ahead.
Yeah. Before you go on, you made 2 points. You made 2 points that I wanted to dive into a little bit more. One was you said, you don't even have the data in your possession anymore. It's now in the cloud, and the regulators, say it can't leave my state. So the whole on-prem, off-prem, the whole up in the cloud, there are a number of individuals out there I've run across that basically say, wait a second, security of data that is in, you name it, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, right, is not my responsibility anymore. They provide that. And it always sort of like boggles the mind when I hear that statement. However, I just was wondering, what are your thoughts if you were to hear somebody say that?
Well, besides the fact that that's a cringeworthy statement, what I look at it a different way. I don't know how to answer that question other than telling you the way I look at that, right? The value to an organization, what is valuable, right? Is the value of the organization that you're working in, the desks and the buildings and things like that? Is it the people? Is it your processes? 99% of the time, I can pretty much say the value in any organization is going to come down to their data.
Right.
That's what holds the value. That's what gives them competitive edge. That's what gives them, strategic insight. That data is what's valuable. So why do you care where it is? If it's your data and that's the value, then why aren't you protecting it? Why would you just go, I don't need to be the dealer, wash the hands and walk away from the No, you've got to be the one that says, that's my data.
And from a risk perspective, let's say we're talking about, personally identifiable information, player data, right? And this player data is being stored on the cloud. If that data is hacked, right? Mm-hmm. Who's liable? Is it the cloud provider or is it you as the quote unquote owner of the data?
Well, I mean, legally, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on television and I don't provide legal advice. But, somewhere along the way, it's going to be both legally, but reputationally,
yes.
And in light of who's going to take the brunt of that hit, it's not going to be AWS. It's not.
That's right.
It's going to be whoever owns that data, whoever's had the value. So that's us. That's me. That's my company. Yep. So yeah, I'm not going to give that to a third party without really saying, I want to know how that data is protected. And if I can protect it without them and just use them as storage or transport medium, I'm going to do that too.
Yeah.
Brandon, you seem like you're agreeing.
Well, the pain and the cost is ultimately borne by the brand, and especially for organizations that have an extraordinary brand to protect. There's trust is fundamental to the commercial relationship. It's the foundation of prosperity, and when that gets exposed, when you incur a cyber risk and you actually have a breach or an incident, it's hugely costly. And in fact, Max Scheer's going to some length to actually quantify that. We can actually look at these events with respect to publicly traded companies, and we can absolutely assign a dollar value to the brand and what that hit looks like, and we can also risk weight that across the different parts of the what we call the pillars connected to the cyber risk environment.
Mm. And David, coming back to you from again a very specific gaming industry perspective, if you look at the slot floor, not the entire casino floor, but just looking at slots, right?
Yeah.
And you look at the evolution of slot technology, regardless of how sophisticated those gaming devices are, a lot of them are still running, 1980s serial-based, unsecure communication protocols. A lot of them are still using, what we lovingly call SMIBs, or slot machine interface boards, that are inside those machines. They're all networked together. Yes, the slot machines themselves have lots of protections built into their code to prevent, the RNG to be manipulated or the game math to be modified. Yet there's a lot of data that is flowing over that network, I'll call it. How does that fit in to something that you might look at? What are your thoughts on casino floors?
Well, yeah. So one thing I wanted to just give Brendan, I actually use this in some of the stuff about trust. You had mentioned trust and outcome. and it's a statement that was taught to me a long time ago, and trust is the direct effect of predictable outcome.
Yeah.
Right? If I can guess where you're going to go, I can trust you. But if I can't guess where you're going to go, then I don't. And that's the truth. And so as we do all this, we're always about predictable outcomes we need to be able to understand so that people build trust. Right?
Yeah.
Just something when you said it, it was, I've used that before. So but anyway, back to casino floors. So the interesting part of casino floor, I like to say that the 1980s technology that's used on the casino floor is probably one of the best defense mechanisms I have today. I'm just kidding with that, by the way. My point is nobody modern, none of the millennial generation or below knows what serial communication is. It's not IP based and it confuses them, right? That being said, completely in jest, by the way. The casino floor itself, you're absolutely right. I mean, but it's evolving as well. Server-based gaming, where the material is being taken off of the game. Content is being delivered to the game, from video content to integrations into your loyalty programs and differentiations on different screen layers within the game itself for interactions. So from a technological perspective, that game has evolved since those backline communications as well. We treat them very, very specifically. I mean, the gaming regulation aside, and gaming regulation is very specific in what you have to be able to protect and how that game has to operate. And that comes down to a financial bit as well, from anti-money laundering to game manipulation, things like that. But the idea that somebody could get onto the game and manipulate it and then use that to make financial gain, or to take advantage of in a player data to a gain as well. Like it could be politically motivated. There's a lot of different reasons that people could want to get onto that. So we're very particular about that. And looking at how to protect that, even when the game manufacturers and gaming companies haven't evolved to that point yet. But encryption technologies that operate outside of the communication channels of the game. So they're non-interfering, but they wrap the data into an encrypted channel that is decrypted on the other side, so man-in-the-middle attacks can occur. Network segmentation, monitoring, functional views of did the game manipulate, remote counter reads, and ensuring that those aren't being, adversely adjusted. Right? It's if your average jackpot on a machine is, once every 3 days and you're seeing it once every 3 hours, something's probably wrong. So we use statistical data. We go after that. But there are limits because of the technology that's on the back end of it. There are limits to what we can do and limits to what we can put into place. There's limits that we can put in place from the regulators themselves. So, the regulators are saying, no, we don't want the games manipulated. No, we don't want the networks underlying manipulated. We're trying to keep people out of that private information and those kinds of things. And then they're saying, but you can't modify it. You can't touch it. You can't go here. So they're limiting us in an effort to be protective of what they're trying to protect, but they're limiting us from protecting it.
So for example, right, if you've got a networked floor, and if that floor is not truly I'll call it a broadband network, and if that floor does not, and the communication protocols being used are not supportive of tools that might normally be used to protect the back of house network, you mentioned about attacks. That floor could potentially be susceptible to a DDoS attack.
It could.
And
we take physical precautions against that, limiting, right, number of ports, where those ports exist, and so accessibility to it. I remember the story of another facility, it wasn't Wynn, in town, who did one of the first raised floor on the casino floor, as opposed to the turtle system for cable management. And one of the big concerns the regulator was that a person could get under the floor. They could lift the tile and get under. So how high was the floor? What sensors did you have underneath to prevent a human from getting under there and using that as a means to compromise the system? And that's still there today. I mean, and it's legitimate concern, but you got to think of it from that perspective as well.
Anything to add, Brendan?
Well, so it's been in the last 5 years. Part of what David's speaking to is, there are a lot of new architectures that have emerged, both from the trusted encryption environments that are coming to the fore. You also have a lot of breakthroughs in the zero knowledge proofs, which are enabling other communication architectures to protect the IP, to protect algorithms, to protect data. We can there's other breakthroughs in what we call homomorphic encryption and how data can actually be stored. And these are the types of innovations that they're available. They're not yet widely deployed, but they're absolutely going to give CISOs like David and others throughout the industry new opportunities, new options to manage risk.
So maybe I'll continue with you and ask you the next question.
Wait, David.
Yes,
maybe,
sir.
I'm sorry, not that. Mark, if you could give me a second, I was gonna on the first question.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So the how has the cyber risk changed in the gaming industry? How's it evolved? One of the things that we're seeing at MaxSure is just the total number of adversaries have increased, and they've increased in sophistication. The overall number of valuable or monetizable assets has increased. And so what we mean by that is, in the past, maybe they were going after just consumer data. Maybe they were going after just credit card information. At this point, so when we think about the sophistication, at this point, if there's something that's leverageable, if there's an entry into an organization, there's an opening, the actual planning and the resources recruited to exploit not just a single opportunity or a single opportunity vulnerability, they're actually approaching it in a lot of different ways. So they're going to try to leverage many different attacks and attack paths once they have a foothold inside of the infrastructure. So that's increasing. We see. I was talking to Sean Waiora, the CEO of MaxSure, and we were talking about the what we would call maybe a black market venture capitalist groups that are actually funding cyber threat actors, and so just the organization and the overall sophistication of attacks is increasing. And so they're actually the approach of the adversaries is to more fully exploit any successful entry. And of course that just it raises the overall stakes for everyone than in the past.
Yeah, and I like your comment of the number of adversaries and the type of adversaries are growing. I think David, called them the millennials. I mean, there seems to be a lot more sophistication out there, and our job, I guess, to protect industries and organizations is to continuously, try to build a better mousetrap, right? We know they're going to get to it, but how do we build that better mousetrap? And I guess that somehow it's a good segue, I guess, to the next question, which is how are organizations really addressing cyber related, it could be regulatory pressures, it could be just business pressures, it could just be the board of directors applying pressure to make sure that they are protected, and how can this be improved moving forward?
Sure. So it's a mind-bending landscape for the CISO and uh, board and executives when they look at the types of solutions. I mean, there are uh, thousands of vendors, all who have a different approach. There's a lot of integration between those that isn't happening, hasn't happened, and so um, so I think what's emerging is a consensus that actually allocating the spending. I mean, there's like I said, there's anyone that is practicing in this space. There's an endless parade of um, vendors who have a solution. They have something that can be deployed, and while those increase in their capabilities, and we see some aggregation in the overall solutions being provided, the actual evaluation and allocation of resources is really difficult. Um, and there are a lot of situations where you've got to run a commercially viable business, and there aren't enough dollars to cover off all the risks. So that forces businesses to to prioritize and rank and consider where the spend is going, and that can be really that is a really challenging environment because there are so many different ways to evaluate and think about cyber risk. One of the things that we're seeing is there's a push towards that, as you said, the regulatory pressures, and so there's a lot of momentum and movement to move towards regulatory frameworks and compliance. And of course, this is kind of a checkbox approach, and it enables executives and responsible parties to over rely on the governance, and they feel like if they have satisfied the requirements of a framework, that they've actually mitigated the risk. But really, what they've done is they've checked some boxes, and I think as we were discussing earlier, the environment is so dynamic, and the the frameworks can address a point in time. The certifications can address a point in time, but there's a process, and sometimes the over-reliance on governance, I think, can lead to a false sense of security when, in fact, the true ownership of the risk that obtain in a business aren't properly recognized or identified. But you have, you're compliant within a framework, and so I think there are approaches that probably are much better suited to actually quantifying risk, assigning those dollars, and having a risk-weighted view of what exposure a business has.
So really, kind of going back to that binder example, right?
Yeah.
Doing the assessment, putting it in a binder and putting it on a shelf, that's not really going to get you much of anything other, as you said, a tick mark in a checkbox. Really, what you need is a system and a process that allows you to see things as they continue to evolve, as changes occur, as new products, new processes, new tools are being deployed in your, I'll call it an ecosystem. You need to once again go back and take a look at your risk security profile and say, am I covered because of this new thing that was introduced? Has this introduced some new loophole, some vulnerability that might be exploited? How do I make sure that all my bases are still covered? But that's a pretty tall order. And as you said, I mean, David's been there for 12 years. I'm sure his budget hasn't grown 12-fold over that time. So how do you do that? I mean, how is that practically possible? Are there tools out there that do that? I mean, how does that work?
Well, go ahead.
Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say, I mean, you had started down a path of saying, how do you build a better mousetrap? And yet you listen to everybody out there and they'll tell you, well, it's just not a matter of when you're going to be breached. It's everybody's going to be breached. It's just a matter of when you know about it. So is there such thing as a better mousetrap? I think you have to ask that question first. And it goes back to what I said before. Where is the value? What's valuable? Focus to the resource constraint, because you are correct. My budget has not increased 12-fold, even though that would be, I don't know. That's a double-edged sword. Do I want it to increase 12-fold? If they gave me 12 times the money, then they're going to expect 12 times the results. And I'm not sure that even with 12 times the money, I could give that kind of results. So that's a different question that I'd have to explore. I haven't quite thought through that yet. But the point is that ROI has got to be there, right? The people who grant the dollars into that budget are looking for results coming out of that spend, right? It's not just, hey, here's some money, go have fun. It's here's money that we need to invest in the organization as a protection mechanism to gain result. And we want measurable results in whatever that is. And how do we measure that from a level of risk, a level of protection, a level whatever? So the budget has to be driven to value. Again, what is value? Value is in the data. Value is what's valuable to the organization. If that data is the secret sauce of a process that produces a widget, then protect the secret sauce that produces the widget. If it's the output of that process to, and it's a financial institution and it's the customer records and the personal, then protect where the value is. Whatever that business value is, the budget should be driven in that direction to protect it. Because if everybody's breached and it's just a matter of when, then you need to build, in a sense, the walls around the things that you need to protect, because otherwise they're going to get out. And that's, you had said it in your intro that the pipeline was a single password that compromised a pipeline project.
Right.
Okay. As a security professional, not just the CISO of this organization, I would begin to ask, why did that password have enough power to do what it did? How did they use it to move laterally or inside the organization? Was privileged elevation occurring? Where did it go? There should never be a password that gives you everything you need. Something had to happen in the middle, and I don't have all those details, and don't want to say that, but give people what they need and not what they don't. I mean, that's simple identity management. Privilege is something you need at the time you need it. You don't need it all the time. I have this conversation with my team all the time. How many times have you gone into an organization and every user has administrative privilege to their local machine? Why? It's not their machine, it's the company's. Why do they need that? Oh, because they need to install software. Why are they installing software? They're not your IT department. Stop it. Right? Take the practical approaches that are necessary, the basic stuff, to protect what's valuable. Figure out what's valuable, spend your budget around protecting your value, and stop I hate to say it, stop the stupid activities. It's David, the David Letterman trick. He always had that thing on there called stupid human tricks.
Yes.
I used to use that all the time. And then, so I think that's funny, because that's stop the stupid human tricks.
David, it's funny when you talk about the different approaches, at the board level, the CEOs, the CFOs, there's this tendency to think about cyber risk in terms of the technology. And yet you were just talking about earlier about the need to bolt the floors down, and so there's and maybe the most important thing you could do is bolt the floors down, and maybe it's access control, maybe it's physical security. And, it may not be a technology solution. When we think about the whole cyber risk environment, having people that have a cyber risk aware posture and aren't clicking on any link that just happens to come into their email and creating exposure. Like, that's a cultural issue. So those, at MaxSure, we've got different pillars, and we're risk weighting versus the actual value of the assets that have exposure. But it's not just an exercise from technology. Okay, so you are going to need to look at your infrastructure. You are going to look at the applications and applications vulnerability. But you also have different industry factors. I mean, let's face it, gaming and banking and high-profile consumer companies, they've got a lot of visibility. They have a different type of risk profile. You have a lot of people factors, and we were talking about culture and people's orientation towards cyber threat and their daily business conduct. But there's also just an assessment of your people and what they have access to, and that's even before they put their hands on technology. It's like, well, what do they have access to, both physically and from a network connectivity standpoint, and what have you checked their backgrounds? There are so there's other pillars when we look at the different organizational factors, and we look at your governance and how you actually deploy controls. All of these things come together, and if you look at them on a risk-weighted basis, you may find that the next point solution in your security stack, in your network security stack, isn't really what you need. Maybe the most important thing you can do is bolt down the floors. And unless you do that broad assessment, unless you're looking at all the different factors that go into your cyber risk profile and you quantify that, you don't know where to allocate your resources. You don't know where to allocate what you're doing.
Exactly.
And to that very point, Brandon, I apologize, David.
Oh no,
I remember all the exposés, right, on the evening news when identity theft was, the big thing in cyber security, and they would go around to like doctors' offices and they would, go rummaging through the trash, and they would pull out all of these, pieces of paper that had names, social security numbers, all kinds of. It's got nothing to do with technology. It's got everything to do with humans and culture and humans doing stupid things.
Absolutely.
Maybe not a trick, but stupid.
Well, but that's the point, is figure what's valuable, where is it going, well, who's touching it, all of those things. You said it very well. You get the holistic view so you know where to drive your resources for maximum effect and protection.
Yeah.
Here's the value. Here's where I got to drive my resources, and because all resources are limited, right? Unfortunately, we don't have unlimited people. We don't have unlimited money. We don't have unlimited time. Every resource is limited. So you got to take and get the best out of the resources you have. So you need to have an understanding of where you're going to put them, because something's going to get zero. Something's going to get some, and some are going to get zero, and make sure the ones that are getting zero are the ones that aren't going to hurt you too bad.
Exactly.
And an example, I'm sorry, real quick example
go ahead,
that I love to tell people, when in an evolution, kind of blending that first question, not from the gaming side, but from our operational side, there was a point in time where all of a sudden in our kitchens, we were getting internet connected ovens. Mm-hmm. And I went, an internet, what does an oven need to connect to the internet for? That's my first thought when I first heard about this, right? Yeah. And the interesting part is you program in the recipe, everything gets downloaded, and the oven basically programs itself for time and temperature so that it always delivers whatever that recipe is consistently out all the time. And I said, well, that's pretty fantastic technology. I get what they're doing. And then I realized, as the guy who can turn his head and go, okay, as a hacker, what would I do with that? But imagine I could take it and tell the oven that it's running at the right temperature, but actually drop it 20 degrees so that it tells the chef that it's done, even though it's underdone. Now I can take a technological hack and turn it into a physical illness. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, that world just changed in what we had to protect. Literally because somebody at the oven manufacturer said, we could do this cool thing with an oven, And now my security program and our security aspects, back to the resource and understanding what's valuable, is to go, now I have to put energy, effort, and resources toward this because our reputation is everything. We don't want to get people sick. We're in the hospitality industry. So the value of that holistic view said, now I need to drive resources to protect that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I did some work with actually a company that develops commercial kitchens. And one of the things which I learned, quite frankly, had never even entered my mind was, I think it was during Hurricane Katrina, the amount of food that was stored in commercial freezers that got thrown away.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it was thrown away is because the operators of those, restaurants, warehouses, could not affirmatively, assert that their freezers kept the food at the constant temperature. So putting IoT sensors that were, sending the data every, whatever it is, every minute to some cloud-based thing, could now prove that, yes, in fact, the refrigeration, the temperature inside of these freezers remained constant, and therefore this food is good. To your point, David, easily hacked potentially and easily manipulated. And now we've got physical illness as opposed to just somebody stealing somebody's identity. So having said all this, I had another question, but I'm going to modify it a little bit. And I'll ask this to both of you. We talked about money. We talked about resource allocation. David, you just said, some areas get none, some get some. Make sure that you're devoting the sum to the areas that have the most value. How do you justify the expense in cyber risk mitigation to executives when it's really kind of like an insurance policy? How do you do that?
It's very much like an insurance policy.
Yeah.
Like insurance, there's a definite constant that we all know, right? You can't prove a negative. I can't prove to you that nothing will happen, because you could say, well, what about tomorrow? It could happen tomorrow. It could happen the next day. I can never prove to you the negative. So all I can do is prove to you what has occurred. How have we addressed the things that we need to address? What are the key metrics associated to understanding, have we taken the protection of that valuable data? That's the important part. If I'm walking into the executive team and I'm trying to explain why I spent $10 million on this new neat nifty gadget that is in the security world, that the brand new vendor came out and he said, oh, you need this to protect your organization. And I went, oh, okay. And I went and spent the money on it, but I'm getting nothing out of it. That's a hard conversation to have. Because they're, why are you spending resources? Why are you spending money on this gadget? And I see zero results or zero improvement in our posture.
Right.
If I go in on the reverse of that and I'm saying, look, here's where we're investing our security dollars. Here's the things that we're trying to protect, what is valuable to the organization, and how we've discovered all of that. And then here's the metrics we use to prove that. But nothing's perfect. I mean, nothing's going to say that I will never have a compromise. I will never have, data loss. Nothing can ever say that, because data loss could be as simple as somebody putting it on a thumb drive that you've authorized, walk out the door and they drop it on the ground and somebody picks it up. That's a data loss, right? I can't say that 100% it will never happen. What I can say is we've taken every precaution. That's what an insurance policy, is for, is we've taken every precaution to prevent it, but it still could happen. I like to use this example. We build the buildings much different today than we ever built. And part of what we do, we have an architectural firm and we build our own buildings. And if you look at the building codes and you look at the way we build buildings, the materials we use between the 1950s and today, massive difference. I mean, from fire resistance, materials to fire retardant stuff, things like that. We do that today. We've made that. We have sophisticated, fire extinguishing systems in the buildings that didn't even exist. Computer controlled, they can adjust pressure and they can sense things going on and shift water around and materials around and different things, not even water, that are chemical based. We wrote policy that said, you can't build a campfire in the middle of the casino floor. And we did all those things too. And we said, no, you can't have, matches and lighters and things like that. Can you ever guarantee that the building will never catch on fire? Security is the same way. I can take every precaution, but it doesn't mean I'm 100%. Something could go wrong. Back to the stupid human trick. Somebody could walk in with a lighter and try to set the carpet on fire. I don't know. It could happen. We put policy. We have security professionals and other people to stop at the door. Like I said, we've taken every precaution. How do you know it's successful? Well, the building hadn't caught on fire yet. Does that mean I have to stop? Does that mean I can go, look, I'm done, go over here and sit and, have a martini? No, it means I've got to continually evaluate that. Back to the whole thing we've been talking about. Know what's happening, what's changed, where did it go? Am I committing my resources in the right place still? Yeah. Right? What I decided a year ago might not be what I need today.
And so, Brendan, what I heard you say before, and this I think goes very much in line with what David just described, is that from a Maxsure perspective, you look at these things as, I think you called them pillars, and you've got a methodology whereby you can ascribe value or risk points or some mechanism to each of those pillars, and then you can look at David and say, what I've done addresses these issues which result in this potential liability to me, so I'm protecting us from potentially having to incur this cost. Even though, as David said, he's got no way to say, I am fully protected, I can only do the best that I can, but I'm going to remain vigilant day in and day out. Can you talk a little bit more about the pillars and a little bit more of how you think about it from within the Maxsure perspective?
Absolutely. So from Maxsure standpoint, so what we're looking at is we can actually and are assigning single event loss potentials across key systems infrastructure. And that's not just limited to how you might think of it as just part of the technology stack. We've been talking about the overall cyber risk profile of a company is not defined solely by the technology. And so, to be able to, when you think of it like an insurance policy, and I would say in both cyber risk insurance and in terms of communicating cyber risk up the chain of command and to the board and to your chief executive. In the past, it's been a monolithic approach. Okay. Yeah, we're good. We got it. We got our certification. That goes back to the checkbox mentality. But that really doesn't answer the question of where are you today versus where you were yesterday. It gets back to the big book on the shelf that says, yeah, we checked all the boxes and we comply with the framework. So actually being able to communicate and articulate what the company's risks are so that they can make the proper choices on which ones they're going to de-risk, because some of the risk you're just going to have to take on. And when you do that, you should probably either accept that risk or insure it. Again, that's from a cyber risk standpoint. I mean, it's from a cyber insurance standpoint, but it's not a monolithic evaluation. Again, it goes back to, are you going to invest in technology, or do you need to bolt down the floors? Do you not have the proper governance? Are you vulnerable, more vulnerable from an education standpoint and a culture standpoint? All of those can be quantified. Again, back to what David is talking about is what is valuable. You have to assess what is the value inside of your organization and how are you protecting it. And it's not just technology. It's all these different factors that MaxSure is evaluating. Okay, so that we can actually assign a score and understand and communicate to the board, to the CEO, to your executive team, so that they can orient towards where the actual risk and the dollar risk weighted decision should be. And again, it goes back to the different pillars that we're operating against. We're looking at organizational factors and people factors. We're looking at the governance and the governance standards. We're looking at the application infrastructure, and all applications aren't created equal, and so you pull in lots of vast amounts of data, either from the government and from private industries, and you correlate it against what your application exposure looks like, and which and those are all weighted. You look at the overall infrastructure. You look at situational factors, and that could be across a lot of different dimensions that are specific to your industry. Okay, so the gaming industry has some really unique risks that don't exist in other industries. And so we think of those and we score those as an industry factor. And so when you get to a MaxSure score, it communicates a benchmark of where and how you are actually situated inside of your industry. And it helps you articulate and communicate risk and allocate and prioritize the resources, typically the scarce resources, right? There's not unlimited resources to deploy to respond to your cyber risk environment. You're going to have to make hard choices. And so you can either choose to mitigate it, the risk that you see, you can insure it, or you can accept it. And again, it's not a monolithic exercise. It's not going to your CIO, your chief information officer, your CTO, and say, "Are you guys good? Yeah, we're good. We got this." No, you have to look at it in context, and there's got to be a quantification of the different aspects, what we call pillars. You can think of them as indices across these different dimensions, so that how to protect and where to best allocate your resources. And what risk you want to take, and what resources you're going to insure, and which ones you're going to mitigate. And to do that, you're going to have to make a commitment to looking at your cyber risk holistically. And that's what MaxSure does. And I guess as a former customer, what always excited about me is that you can get there really fast. Okay, so it's a really honed process that you get stepped through, and it's not like you're going to have to deploy vast armies to go out and actually do this. You can actually evaluate it quickly and have actionable information that you can communicate to your board and to all the stakeholders across the organization about how you're going to orient and take on or mitigate cyber risk.
You know what? I just realized we've got 2 minutes to go in this webinar. I'm sort of he's gonna hit me next time he sees me, but I'm sort of glad that John did not make it, because I don't think we would have covered the material that we had to cover if we had 3 panelists. We do have a number of questions that came in. Some of them related to a comment made by David on regulators and regulation. Another one related to pen testing. Given that John was not able to participate, and given that it seems like this topic can be discussed in greater depth, and maybe we expand it a little bit. I think if you guys are okay, gentlemen, we could think about doing a part 2 sometime in the future. Maybe make sure John can participate, and maybe we can address some of those questions that came up. I obviously want to thank you very much for taking the time to participate today. I want to thank the audience, the participants who listened. Hopefully this was of value. Hopefully this sparked some thought. And please stay tuned. We will put out information about I'll call it a part 2. And we'll dive into those other questions, and we'll expand on topics that we discussed today. And to the participants, if you have any other questions and you want to send them in to IGSA, please feel free to do that, and we will take them and make sure we cover them in the next event. So with that, gentlemen, thank you very much. To our participants and listeners, thank you very much as well, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.